When I reached my son's wedding reception and found my place card, I understood exactly what Celeste Langford thought of me. In a hand so neat, it could have been printed, my name read, Evelyn Hart Pity Invite. The words sat there like a smirk in ink. I fastened the card to my navy dress, the practical one I'd pressed that morning, and let the room's light skim over sequins and silk that were not mine. I smiled, thanked a passing server for water, and said nothing. Silence travels farther than outrage. 6 months earlier, before rose garlands and quartets, my son Daniel had brought Celeste to my apartment. She walked slowly through the living room, pausing at the bookshelf where my framed photos leaned in their inexpensive stands. Birthdays, graduations, afternoons at the park. "It's so cozy," she said, stretching the word so it sounded stylish and not small. Celeste came from a family people called Old Harbor money, the kind whose last names sit on plaques and on the lips of docents who rehearse them during museum tours. Daniel's eyes shone. He'd fallen all the way in. I kept my voice even. "Would you like some tea?" She declined with a graciousness that felt rehearsed. Their engagement party took place a few weeks later at the Langford estate, where chandeliers dripped from frescoed ceilings and the air tasted faintly of lemon and old varnish. The guest list read like a registry for regattas. Margaret Langford, Celeste's mother, introduced me as if reading a small print footnote. Evelyn's from the Midwest. She said the syllables brushed with a smile that made the compass direction sound like an unfortunate condition. I thanked the caterer for the crab cakes and practiced being ordinary. It's a talent, and it serves you well in rooms that mistake volume for importance. When the wedding planning began in earnest, decisions slid past me like boats in a fog. I offered to host the rehearsal dinner. "That's very kind," Margaret replied, "but please don't overextend yourself. We have everything in hand." She patted my forearm, the way one pats a child who asks to lift the piano. I nodded, and she mistook my nod for agreement. You learn a great deal when people believe your limits are tighter than they are. The bridal shower was an afterthought invitation that arrived with a perfumed apology. "We didn't realize you weren't already on the thread." I took a bus to the country club with a glass vase wrapped in tissue, simple clear, meant for peonies or sunshine. Celeste unwrapped it, held it up, and tilted her head as if considering a puzzle. "So practical," she announced brightly. "Every household needs basics." The room laughed the way people laugh when they want to show they understand the joke before anyone else does. I sipped a polite sip of champagne that wasn't worth its label and memorized faces. Names are easy to forget. Expressions are forever. June came, and with it a cloudless Saturday. The lawn behind the Langford house looked like it had been ironed. White chairs glowed in generous rows, and a violinist polished the afternoon with a familiar melody. I chose the same navy dress I had worn to church on holidays, clean lines, a hem that didn't quarrel with my knees, a neckline that asked for pearls, and accepted costume jewelry instead. I pinned my hair back and stepped into shade whenever I could, as though staying cool might also keep me invisible. During the ceremony, as Daniel and Celeste exchanged vows, scripted to sound spontaneous, she glanced over her shoulder at me. Her face was bright for him, glacier for me. It's an odd thing to be both family and scenery. I looked past her to the tall hedges that guarded the property from the street, and thought about how hedges are trimmed a little each week, or not at all until a brutal cut. The minister spoke of rivers joining and seasons turning. I smiled for the photographs and held my hands together so they wouldn't speak for me. Inside the reception tent, the light was its own guest, trapped and sparkling on crystal. I made for table 12, which lived near the service doors, a humming little region where trays came and went like tides. The family's head table, of course, sat beneath an arch that could have framed a painting. Laughter bubbled there, the pleasant kind that never arrives at those of us seated far away. I didn't mind. Distance is a kind of vantage. That's where the place cards waited, standing upright like small white doors. Charles Langford. Margaret Langford. Daniel Hart, written with elegant strokes. Mine, as I've said, carried an additional note. Pity invite, as if clarification were a courtesy. I felt the breath catch in my chest, not from hurt, so much as from the audacity of putting a whisper into print. Around me someone saw it and touched her pearls, delighted. Another guest raised his eyebrows and let them fall into a grin. An insult gains value quickly when it's shared. Margaret arrived with a well-trained gasp. What on earth, she said, eyes wide like theater lights. This must be a mix-up. Celeste followed bright as a blade. Not a mix-up, she said. Just transparency. Families should start with the truth. She lifted her glass and let her smile travel from guest to guest like a tray. Don't you agree, Evelyn? Her tone suggested that agreement was a kind of etiquette. I picked up the card, turned it between my fingers, and considered the ink as if quality control were the question. You're right, I said, meeting her gaze. Truth is essential to families. It keeps us from confusing decorations with foundations. A few people shifted in their chairs, uncertain whether they had just heard a compliment or a correction. Celeste's laugh chimed in the air, delicate as a warning bell. The quartet in the corner moved into something cheerful and brisk. I slid the card into my purse and stood. If we're to continue in truth, I said pleasantly, I think I'll stretch my legs before the first course. All this light could use a breeze. I thanked the server who held the flap of the tent for me. You run a tight ship back here, and stepped out into the evening, where the estate's library sat beyond an open terrace, its old windows holding rectangles of dusk. The hedges looked taller from the lawn, and the violins softened as I walked away. From the terrace, the tent still glittered a snow globe of applause and cutlery. I paused for a moment and adjusted the pin on my dress. There's a tone people use when they think they've named you correctly. It's the tone of labels and favors of gatekeepers who enjoy their keys. I have heard that tone before. It makes me very patient. By the time I circled the long path past the roses and returned to the edge of the tent, the speeches had begun. Someone praised the Langford legacy, another recalled Daniel's generosity in college. I listened from the shade, steadying my breath, and understood that the evening had performed exactly as it was designed to. Beautiful enough to dazzle, loud enough to drown out the small sound a heart makes when it closes its fist. I stepped back inside, touched Daniel's shoulder, and kissed his cheek. I'm proud of you, I said. His eyes searched mine, puzzled, grateful, in love with his future. I'll be just a moment, I added. Then I took the narrow aisle, along the caterer's corridor, past the trays of waiting desserts, and into air that didn't taste like applause. In the foyer, a photograph of the house under construction hung in a gilded frame. The scaffolding looked like bones. People admire what is finished and forget who had to climb to finish it. I smoothed the front of my dress, squared my shoulders, and let the hush of the hallway settle around me. Somewhere behind me, a toast rose like a wave and broke. I kept walking. I did not raise my voice. I did not draw attention. I simply decided that if truth was to be our family's custom, as Celeste insisted, then it should be more than calligraphy on a card. It should be the kind of truth that rearranges a room. I opened my purse, placed the card neatly inside, and reached for my phone. Not yet, I thought. Not here. Part 1 of any lesson is observation. Part 2 is remembering who you are. I left the reception tent without ceremony, the place card folded flat in my purse like a pressed leaf, and crossed the terrace toward the Langford Library. The room smelled of lemon oil and paper-orderly wealth. A portrait of some Langford ancestor watched over the paneled walls with a permanent air of having gotten his way. I closed the door behind me, set my purse on the desk, and dialed a number I knew better than most birthdays. Adrian. It's Evelyn, I said when my attorney picked up. We moved tonight. Adrian Cole had represented me for 15 years, through hospital corridors, probate papers, and the first board vote where men twice my age realized I had read the packet more closely than they had. His voice came level as always. Understood. Which levers? All of them, I said. Begin with Juniper Street Partners and the Oak Lantern Trust. Pull our funds from the Langford adjacent vehicles, East Shore Municipal Baylight Growth, the Langford Vendor Invoice Facility. Then notify Arden Bank we are accelerating repayment on the Langford Capital revolving line. I looked up at the portrait. We'll use the 48-hour clause. No extensions. A pause that contained 100 calculations. You're certain, Adrian said. Absolutely. Then I'll start the calls. Some institutions will ring back within the hour. They will, I said. And Adrian document everything. Time-stamped sign-offs, courier receipts. We won't litigate, but we will be tidy. When I hung up, I stood a moment in the softened silence of the library, listening to distant music that sounded cheerful from far away. The Langfords like to talk about legacy. Legacies I've learned run on calendars and covenants. You don't need to shout at a ledger. You write a date and the ledger obeys. People had expected me to downsize after Leonard died. They spoke gently in those week's condo brochures. Warm climates, a bridge group. Leonard Hart. My husband of 35 years had built Hart and Northbridge from a borrowed desk and a few stubborn clients. When the doctor's final calendar arrived, I sat with him and listened to instructions I never had to ask for. You already know what to do, he said. He was right. While others wrote us stories about grief and retirement, I wrote lists. I learned how reserves become votes and votes become policy. I learned to spot leverage hiding in etiquette. I walked through balance sheets the way other people walk through museums, stopping at the places where light and shadow meet, taking notes. The Langfords weren't hard to map once I paid attention. Old harbor money, yes, but the harbor had silted assets scattered across foundations and talking points cash, dependent on credit that required the room to stay impressed. This house was tied to Langford Capital's corporate borrowing base. The charity boards Margaret chaired drew major grants from the Hart Foundation, which we dotingly listed under a perfectly ordinary name. Charles the Patriarch worked at Halcyon Capital in acquisitions, a division whose performance metrics turned twitchy when conflicts of interest haunted the margins. I had not intended to test them, but then I saw a place card. Back in the tent, a toast rose. I took the long corridor out to the gravel drive and let my steps slow. The first call from Adrian returned before I reached the hydrangeas. Juniper Street redeemed by end of night, he said. Oak lantern signed. Bay-like growth is pushing for Monday. Decline the delay, I said. Document their objection. Send a copy to the custodian. Done. Halcyon, different bucket, he said carefully. But your board authority at Arden Bank is sufficient to accelerate on the corporate facility with Langford Capital. We will courier notices to their counsel and to the home address on file. He cleared his throat. Evelyn, you'll trigger reviews. They will come fast. I expect them, I said. Rules work both ways. By the time dessert plates clinked, the row of switchboards I'd built over months had begun to glow under someone else's fingers. I had done the slow part, already opening structures, routing exposures, verifying signatures. Tonight was only the choreography of yes or no. The next morning, I sat on my small balcony with a mug of coffee and the city's hum just waking beneath it. A sparrow hopped the rail as if rehearsing the day. Adrian's overnight summary sat printed on the table. Acknowledgements, notices, wire, confirmations, and 3 separate emails from institutions that had never written to me directly until it was in their interest to do so. Money, in my experience, doesn't announce itself. It prefers back hallways and muted carpet. The louder the room, the less reliable the balance sheet. My phone buzzed at 8:12 a.m. Daniel. Mom, he said, without preamble. Have you heard from Celeste? Something's wrong. Her parents are panicking and their lawyer keeps calling. It's like the ground moved under them. I watched the sparrow hop again. Which part of the ground? I don't know, he said. There were messages about facilities and maturities. Dad Langford said a bank demanded repayment. Why would that happen on a Sunday? It doesn't make sense. Calendars make more sense to banks than weekends, I said. Especially if the dates were set long ago. He exhaled. Celeste is crying. She says they might lose the house. They've always been fine, Mom. You've seen the place. I've seen the place, I said. Houses can be fine while their paperwork is not. Sometimes what looks like wealth is merely spend permitted by someone else's patience. He went quiet. Are you saying they were never... I'm saying presentation costs money too, I said gently. It is a line item like any other. What matters is cash, debt, and timing. They're experiencing timing. Can you help? He asked. It was a child's question from a good man, and it made me love him harder. We'll talk about help, I said. But tonight, let them talk to their own accountants. The first hour of a storm is mostly noise. He hesitated. This isn't about that thing on your card, is it? It's about the difference between labels and facts, I said. Facts tend to outlast ink. By 9:30, Adrian began the hourly updates. Arden filed the acceleration notices at 7:58, he said. Langford Capital has until close of business Tuesday to cure, otherwise the default becomes formal. The custodian for East Shore confirmed your redemption at midnight. Their compliance team sent a courtesy alert. Charles Langford is now subject to a conflict review at Halcyon effective immediately. Will that cost him his job? I asked. Not because I didn't know the range of outcomes, but because hearing them out loud is part of deciding. If Halcyon wishes to appear scrupulous, they suspend pending review, Adrian said. If they wish to appear loyal, they invent a Chinese wall. Both are theater. The real issue is liquidity, the house. Yes, the estate's mortgage is through Langford Capital's corporate facility. If the facility is in default, the real property becomes leverage for the cure. How much? Balloon of $2.6 million due within 48 hours, he said. They have 24 in practice given couriers and countersignatures. I don't see it. I pictured Margaret's bracelets and all the rooms in that house where Light mostly worked on surfaces. They threw a wedding at the top of their line, I said. Closer to past it, he replied. Between calls, I moved from chair to sink to window, and back the way you do when you're waiting for a pot to boil, even though you haven't turned on the stove. I watered the plant that refuses to die in my kitchen and thought about how long it takes to build something that looks effortless. Months to map, weeks to test, years to know what to test for. An evening to pull the thread. At noon, Daniel called again, voice tight. Mom, I don't recognize Celeste like this. She keeps saying reputation and shame. She says everyone will talk. People talk most when they're trying to convince themselves they understand what happened, I said. What actually happened is simpler. Clocks did. It feels like overkill, he said. Even if they were rude, this could ruin them. I didn't ruin anything, I said, keeping my voice level and kind. I took off covers. What you're seeing is the shape underneath. You could tell them, he said. What you're doing. They might ask you for terms. They might apologize. They will ask, I said. The order matters. He sighed, then spoke softer. Are you angry with me? No, I said. I am angry that people who claim to value truth wrote it on a card and then thought truth would stop there. You, Daniel, have always been decent. Decency is harder than power. It's why you will keep both. When we hung up, I put the phone down and let the apartment be quiet. I remembered Leonard's hands the exact way he folded napkins at dinner, like contracts he meant to honor. I remembered the first time I visited a client alone and discovered that if you know your documents, you don't need to raise your voice. And I remembered the look Celeste gave me during the vows, eyes edged with certainty, and realized certainty is only a kind of sleep. At 1 o'clock, Adrian appeared at my door with a folder and a face that said he had slept less than me. Walk me through the full state, I said, pouring coffee. He set out pages, a timeline of the last 12 hours, a list of funds with signature blocks, a chart of call-outs to counterparties. 2 holdouts tried to argue the language on material adverse, but your counsel's letters from last quarter anticipated this. They folded. Halcyon, I asked. Charles was placed on administrative review, he said. It will likely be announced Monday to look procedural. In practice, he's already off anything that requires discretion. And the house, they'll get a visit from a man with a portfolio and a clipboard, he said. He will be precise, polite, and without mercy. If they do not wire funds by late tomorrow, a filing begins Tuesday. We sat at my little table, real estate of a different scale than the Langford dining room. I traced one finger along the margin of a page. Adrian makes sure the notices include the option purely formal, that the acceleration can be rescinded if the borrower satisfies conditions and pays all fees. You want to leave the bridge visible, he said. Bridges should be visible, I said. People don't learn if all they see is a trap. He nodded. We're within the documents, clean as glass. When he left, I stepped onto the balcony again. The afternoon had the lazy brightness of a day that intends to end well for someone. I watched a neighbor carry groceries, a couple argue gently about whether basil counts as a vegetable. A boy in a striped shirt roll a basketball under a bench and crawl after it with solemn purpose. It felt almost indecent that other people's Sundays continued, but they did. Most storms are local. At 3, Daniel texted, she wants to know if you'll talk to her. I wrote back tomorrow. 1 o'clock. Marlowe's Diner on Elm. She knows it. That last sentence I knew would sting in a particular way. Dignity sometimes begins with stepping into a room you would normally ignore. Adrian called once more near 5. One more piece, he said. Margaret's charity boards, too, have quietly emailed the Heart Foundation to confirm next quarter's grant cycle. You'll receive them tomorrow. Reply with the standard language I said. Program outcomes, site visits, compliance checks. Put my name on the calendar for the shelter they've put on the brochure for 5 years without setting foot in. Wednesday, 8 a.m. He chuckled softly, understood. I made myself dinner eggs toast a slice of peach and ate at the counter. Somewhere in the middle of the toast, I realized I felt neither triumph nor guilt. I felt order. The file cabinet in my head had a new tab, Langford Lesson Active. It is not revenge to insist on gravity. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. Thank you for answering. I know you don't owe them anything. I owe you honesty, I wrote. The rest is optional. Night came the way it always does, slowly. Then all at once, I washed the plate, set it in the rack, and checked the lock on the door. On the table, Adrian's folder looked almost domestic, as if it might hold recipes. I slipped the library place card beside it. Tomorrow would be the day for terms, and for the first confession offered freely. Tonight was for small rooms and a backbone you can only feel when no one is looking. Before I slept, I thought about the phrase that had passed around the tent like a hors d'oeuvre truth. They had meant candor that costs nothing. I meant facts that demand behavior. In the morning, Celeste would ask what she could do. I would tell her. Whether she learned was up to her. For now, I let the apartment be dark and kind. I turned my phone face down. Somewhere, a clock moved a second closer to a deadline. If the Langfords truly wanted truth, they would meet it in daylight. Marlowe's diner sits on a corner where the city forgets to posture. No valet stand, no maitre d'. The doorbell tings like a wristwatch, and the air smells of coffee and hot steel. I arrived at 12:50 and chose a booth with a view of the door. It is useful to see people as they decide to enter. At 1 o'clock sharp, Celeste Langford stepped in, wearing a dress that had met better days. The polish had drained out of her. Grief and fear do that faster than time. She paused, scanning the room as if the menu might accuse her, then found me and crossed the tile with careful, almost formal steps. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice was thin but steady. "Have a seat," I said. "Rita will take care of us." Rita gray-braid quick hands set down water, a paper menu, and 2 small plates like punctuation. Celeste turned the menu over twice. "What should I order?" "Something you'll actually eat," I said. "The roast chicken is honest. The pie is better." She nodded, then folded her hands together on the formica like a penitent. For a long moment, we listened to dishes touch each other behind the counter. "I don't know where to begin," she said at last. "Begin where it hurts," I said. "Pain is surprisingly specific." She inhaled. "My father has been pulled from his projects at Halcyon. There are notices, words I don't recognize, about accelerations and cures. The house, there was a call. They said we must wire an amount we do not have. My mother is speaking in circles. Daniel keeps asking whether this can be fixed." She swallowed. It can be addressed," I said. "Fixed depends on behavior." "Behavior," she repeated, as if trying out a foreign grammar. "Is this because of the way I treated you?" "This is because truth eventually requires action," I said. "You announced a kind of truth the night you wrote on a card." "I am offering a harder kind." Rita returned with coffee. Celeste wrapped both hands around the mug as if warmth might enter faster that way. "I was ignorant," she said. "Cruel. I know that now. If there is any path to help my family, any at all, I will take it." "Any is a dangerous word," I said, "but I did bring a path." I took a folded sheet from my bag. Not legal paper, plain with a short title, Terms of Repair. I slid it across the table. Celeste read silently, her eyes moving left to right like a metronome. The color left her face line by line. Employment. 6 months of paid work with City Line Facilities, a professional cleaning and maintenance service. Minimum 5 shifts per week. Tasks as assigned by the supervisor. You will clock in, clock out, and complete the safety training like every other hire. Service. Weekly volunteer work at Haven House, the shelter our foundation funds. You will take the shifts no one requests, kitchen cleanup, laundry intake. 1 year. No cameras, no press. Housing. Relocate to Unit 3C in my building for the length of the employment term. Pay rent on time. Live within a written budget we build together. No household staff, no charge accounts. Learning. Attend a monthly workshop I will run on personal finance budgeting. Credit contracts, taxes, and the social skills that money tends to atrophy, listening. Receiving correction, apologizing well, boundaries. No transfers from your parents. No bridge loans from friends. Earn and spend what you earn. If your family wishes to survive as a family, it cannot continue as a subsidy. Restitution. A written private apology to the staff who were mocked or made to serve the joke at the wedding. Not a performance. A letter for each person who touched that place card calligrapher planner server, thanking them for their labor and owning your words. She lowered the paper to the table as if it had weight. You want me to clean professionally. I want you to do work that does not flatter you, I said. And to discover the way competence feels when the world is not clapping. Her lips trembled. I've never held a mop. You've held a glass, I said. Balance is transferable. She let out a brief, helpless sound that was not laughter, and the shelter, people you've claimed to help are not concepts, I said. You will meet them. They will teach you as much as you think you are doing for them. The menu between us had a picture of pancakes glossy and impossible. She smoothed a corner that didn't need smoothing. If I agree, she whispered, what will you do for my parents? I will ask Arden Bank to hold notices in abeyance, I said. I will direct Juniper Street to roll its funds back into the instruments that keep your father's division from scrutiny. And I will ask council to begin the paperwork to move your house into a protective trust after I see evidence of your compliance. She stared. You can do all that. I can ask, I said. As a matter of corporate governance, I am persuasive. What are you? The question escaped more as breath than sound. A widow who did her homework, I said. Rita arrived with plates. Celeste flinched at the clatter, then mumbled thanks. We ate in a kind of ritual silence for several minutes. Food steadies the room. Finally, Celeste folded the sheet again and looked up. I need time. 24 hours, I said. Tomorrow at 1. Same table. She nodded. May I take this with me? Of course, I said. Bring it back signed or torn in half. Both are honest gestures. When she left, she did so without the choreography that had accompanied her entrances for months. She glanced back once, not to perform gratitude, but to make sure the door would open again if she pushed. It was nearly 8 that evening when my buzzer sounded. I do not receive unannounced guests. People who know me know to call. I pressed the intercom. Ms. Hart, a man said. It's Charles Langford. I apologize for the intrusion. The name hung in the small foyer like a draft. I considered my options no later and pressed the release. Charles reached my door, looking 20 pounds lighter in confidence and 10 pounds heavier in consequence. His shirt was wrinkled tie loosened the mask of competence dented at the cheekbones. I won't take much of your time, he said. May I? I stepped aside and motioned to the table. He sat gingerly on the straight-back chair as if it might have a test hidden beneath it. Coffee, I offered. Yes, he said, and the word carried more gratitude than caffeine deserved. I poured. He didn't touch the cup. He reached inside his jacket and laid 3 printed pages on the table with care. I spent the day pulling threads, he said. I should have pulled them years ago. I followed the redemptions and the notices and found the same quiet fingerprints. Northbridge Holdings, Gull and Lantern LP. The Hart Foundation, with a name so ordinary, no one on our side bothered to notice it funded everything that earned us polite praise. He inhaled. They led to you. I said. I should say it correctly, he went on, eyes on the pages. They led to entities you control, a voting block at Arden Bank large enough to call dates on revolving credit. A majority beneficial position in Halcyon Group, not just my division, the parent, and sign-off authority for 2 of the funds that provide our beloved liquidity when we dress our dead in better clothing. He looked up. You didn't just pull a lever, Ms. Hart. You built the control room. I let the word settle control. It is a tool like a pen. It writes what you decide to sign. What do you want? He asked, and this time there was no bravado left, only a father's question. I want your daughter to learn, I said, and your household to stop living on applause. He nodded once, as if that sentence slotted into gears he already suspected were there. Celeste told me about terms, he said. She said the word mop, as if it were a foreign coin. I don't know if she can do it. I do, I said. Because she has already done the harder thing. Admit that she is not who she wants to be. He winced, perhaps at the echo of his own unadmitted truths. If she accepts, will you? Will we keep our home? You will keep a home, I said. The house if possible, something smaller, if wiser. Pride is not a lienable asset, Mr. Langford. It can be forfeited without a court. He took that in with the slow assent of someone signing a paper he finally understands. Thank you for seeing me, he said. Whatever you think of us, know that I am." His voice thinned. "I am ashamed. Shame can be sterile," I said. "Try responsibility. It produces better outcomes." He almost smiled. Payne's version of cooperation, then stood, shook my hand as if it meant something again, and left the apartment lighter by a truth he had carried into it. The next afternoon, the buzzer sounded at 12:57, which is how my son announces himself when he is with a person he hopes I will receive. I opened the door before the second chime. Daniel came in first. He looked torn between protecting someone he loves and discovering he doesn't know her yet. Celeste followed, hair pulled back, eyes resolute. She held the paper I had given her yesterday, now creased and softened at the folds. "Mom, Daniel said we're here because I asked you to come," Celeste said quickly. "This is my conversation." They took the couch. I took the chair. The apartment felt smaller with their urgency inside it. "I've read your terms," Celeste began, voice steady. "I disagree with some of them. I don't think moving into your building will teach me more than commuting would. I don't know why letters to the wedding staff matter when there are larger fires." "Disagreement is allowed," I said. "What do you accept?" She laid the paper on her knees. "I will work for Cityline for 6 months. I will take the shelter shifts every Saturday if they'll have me. I will attend the workshops. I will build and live by a budget." She looked up. "And I will write the letters." Daniel turned toward her, Celeste. "Stop," she said softly. "I have been wrong in rooms so long I thought echo was proof." She turned to me again. "I accept." I nodded once. Then I stood cross to the small desk by the window and lifted a binder I keep for conversations that ought not to rely on my word alone. I set it on the table and opened to a page marked Positions and Authority. Not account numbers, principles, voting percentages, board powers, trustee responsibilities. The architecture of yes. Daniel. I said your question these past 2 days has been how I can make promises. I prefer not to promise. I prefer to act. But to ease your mind, this page is why I can call Arden, and this page is why Halcyon will listen, and this page is why Juniper Street takes my call first. He read silently, his mouth opening once and then closing again. Celeste watched his face and then looked down at her own hands as if the lines there might form a map she had missed. "I cleaned houses for 2 years after your father died," I told my son, because some truths belong in daylight, before I realized what I had inherited and what to do with it. I learned that gratitude climbs stairs and dignity carries a bucket without apology. Celeste's eyes shone. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not the thin version we pass around the table, the real kind. Keep the paper." I said, tapping the terms. "Sign it at Cityline's office tomorrow morning when you complete your onboarding. Unit 3C is ready, but if you believe the move is theater, we can amend that line." "I care about substance. We will add a curfew on spending instead." She exhaled, surprised by the mercy of reason. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We work in weeks, not in flashes." Daniel leaned back and blew out a breath he had been holding for a day and a half. "What happens to the notices?" he asked. "I will send an email tonight," I said. Arden will reply in legally dense kindness. Halcyon will invent a phrase that means, "We are reconsidering pending further review." And your parents will meet a man with a clipboard who will say less than he knows and more than they want to hear. If compliance appears by Friday, we thaw. If not, we continue. Celeste nodded, as if hard edges might finally be trustworthy. "May I ask one thing more?" "You may ask," I said. "When this is over, when I've done it right, what should I aim to be? Not by title, by character." I let the question rest on the table between us. Then I said, competent, kind, bored by cruelty, interested in work, comfortable with small rooms, ready to leave a party where the laughter requires a witness. She smiled, brief, fragile, real. "I can try that." "Trying is a verb," I said. "I accept verbs." They stood to go. At the door, Daniel hugged me longer than usual. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, uncertain whether he meant her or me, or the stubborn quiet middle of us both. After they left, I sat with the binder open and the afternoon light sidling across the page. There is a kind of relief in choosing a standard and holding to it even when it would be fashionable to abandon it. I took the place card from the drawer Evelyn Heart Pity invite and slipped it into a sleeve at the back of the binder, not as a trophy but as a file label. Origin of project. That evening, I sent 3 emails, the first to Adrian Cole, hold abeyance at Arden pending compliance, prepare trust drafts, schedule site visit at Haven House. The second to City Line Facilities, new hire. Celeste Langford expedite training. Treat as you treat the rest. The third to myself, a habit I learned from Leonard, a 1-line memo that reads the way conscience sounds. Remember, the point is, repair not theater. Tomorrow would be the first day that moved the needle. Not because of my emails, but because of where Celeste would put her hands at 8 a.m. By the time winter loosened its grip, the city had learned to be ordinary again. Morning steam rose from manhole covers buses shouldered along, and the sun arrived late but on schedule. 6 months had passed since the diner, and I had made a habit of walking through the lobby of Halcyon Group after board sessions, not because I needed to, but because certain truths are best checked in person. That afternoon, the marble floor was clean enough to mirror the ceiling lights. A woman in blue coveralls knelt near the elevator, scrubbing a seam other people would never see. She glanced up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and for a heartbeat, we simply considered the distance we'd crossed. Ms. Hart, Celeste said, pushing herself to her feet. "You surprised me." "I've been upstairs," I said. "Thought I would visit the part of the building that makes the rest look polished." She smiled, uncertain at first, then with a steady kind of pride. The polish she wore now was the kind you can't buy the result of showing up when no one claps. "How is City Line treating you?" I asked. "They treat me like a person who has a job," she said. "It turns out I like that." She flexed her hands, the manicure long gone. "I'm quick with corners, slow with stainless steel, and I've stopped being afraid of the bucket. And Haven House." Her face warmed. "On Saturdays I work intake. People come in, wet, tired, hungry. We learn names first, then needs. There's a teenager with a red backpack who started bringing me riddles. I get most of them wrong." She laughed softly. "I'm becoming interesting to myself in ways that have nothing to do with a guest list." "Good," I said. "Interesting is a renewable resource." Around us, a pair of analysts hurried by mid-argument about a model that wouldn't balance. They didn't notice the woman who had just made their morning shine. "I won't keep you," I said. "But I brought something for you." I reached into my bag and passed her a sealed envelope, the thin legal kind that prefers to mind its business. She turned it over once, twice. "Should I open it now?" "If you like." Her hands trembled less from fear than from the momentum of change as she broke the seal. The letterhead carried the Halcyon crest and several lines of words that matter: promotion, compensation role, expansion, effective immediately. She read twice, then looked up. "My father." She didn't finish. "Charles took a leave long enough to make corrections," I said. "He returned ready to meet the job rather than dress it. Halcyon appreciates that posture." "So do I." A tear traced a clean path across the dust on her cheek. "How did you—" "I didn't," I said. "You did." Compliance followed behavior. Then the machinery moved. She folded the letter back into its envelope with the care of someone learning to cradle good news. "What about the house?" "I have one more errand," I said. "Walk with me." We left the lobby together and crossed the avenue to a small law office where Adrian Cole waited with a folder and the faint smile of a man who enjoys a neat file. He stood when we entered. "Ms. Langford," he said, offering his hand. "We've prepared the documents we discussed. A family trust with provisions that prioritize residence over display. It keeps the roof where it belongs over heads not in brochures." Celeste looked from him to me. "You would do that. For us." "I told you at the diner," I said. "This was always about repair, not theater." I tapped the folder. "This keeps your address from being a hostage. You will fund it over time within your means. And if you ever forget the difference between shelter and spectacle, the trust will remind you." She nodded, a quick, earnest movement. "I won't forget." Adrian explained the clauses, the kind that keep a house from pretending to be a trophy, and we signed what needed signatures. When we finished, he slid a copy toward Celeste. "One more item," he said. "The board at Haven House sent a note about your work. They asked if you would consider joining their operations committee once your volunteer term ends." Celeste blinked me. "You," I said. "Competence attracts invitations. Accept only the ones that still let you mop if necessary." Outside, the air had sharpened. We stood on the sidewalk watching pedestrians navigate wind and schedules. "Will you come to dinner on Sunday?" Celeste asked suddenly. "We're cooking." "Nothing fancy. Soup and bread." "Daniel says you like soup that tastes like the vegetables meant it." I do, I said, and yes, Sunday arrived with a clear sky and a late sun. Celeste opened the door before I knocked. Apron flour-dusted hair tied back, eyes bright without effort. The apartment smelled like onions showing off and time doing its job. "Come in," she said. "We're almost ready." Daniel kissed my cheek and took my coat. His relief had matured into something sturdier than simple happiness. We sat at a small table that once would have embarrassed this family and now seemed perfectly sized for 3 people telling the truth. Celeste ladled soup clumsy at first, then careful. I wrote the letter, she said, setting a bowl in front of me. To the calligrapher, the planner, the servers. I didn't apologize for the party. I apologized for my choices. I thanked them. Most wrote back. One sent a photo of her daughter's drawing. "It's on our fridge." "I'm glad you wrote them," I said. "Work is easier when people are seen." We ate. The soup behaved like it knew what it was doing, broth deep enough to matter. Vegetables softened but not surrendered. The bread cracked exactly where bread should. "I made a budget," Celeste said when we'd settled. "We live inside it. Sometimes it squeaks. Mostly it hums. I never knew a number could feel like a boundary and a kindness at the same time." "That's all a budget is," I said. "A fence you build around your future so the goats don't eat it." She laughed, genuine and light. "You should put that on the workshop slides." Daniel refilled our glasses. "I wanted to ask, why didn't you tell me any of this before the wedding? About what you own, what you run?" "Because ownership isn't the point," I said. "Stewardship is. If I had led with money, you would have spent the last year trying to protect me from being disappointed by people who were never my measure." He sat back considering. "I think I understand now." "You do," I said. "Understanding is what your face does when it stops apologizing for seeing clearly." We finished dinner, cleared plates, and stood in the kitchen doing the ordinary choreography of rinsing and stacking. Celeste's hands moved without hesitation. There are ceremonies in small rooms that no ballroom can imitate. Before I left, I placed a thin envelope on the counter. "Paperwork from earlier," I said. "The trust is recorded. And there's a second letter for you." Celeste tilted her head. "For me?" "It's from Haven House," I said. "Accept or decline after you've considered whether the meetings will steal time from the work that made them notice you." She ran a thumb along the envelope's edge. "I'll think like a person who knows the cost of an hour." "Good," I said. "That's the kind of arithmetic that changes family keys." In the hall, Daniel hugged me. "Thank you," he said, "for the hard parts." "It wasn't charity," I said. "It was a syllabus." He grinned. "You and your metaphors. They keep my verbs honest." I stepped into the elevator, and through the closing doors, I saw Celeste return to the sink sleeves, rolled posture, relaxed. She had learned the plainest lesson I know. Dignity lives where responsibility does. The elevator hummed down, carrying me toward street level, and the unremarkable evening that awaited. On the walk home, I passed windows full of furniture that mistakes shine for purpose. I have owned pieces like that. I no longer do. At my building, the doorman nodded, and I climbed the stairs instead of waiting for the lift. It felt right to end the day on my own legs. Back in my apartment, I slid the binder labeled Langford Lesson Active from the shelf and tucked a new sheet into the back. Completed, the place card from the wedding Evelyn Hart pity invite remained in its sleeve not as a grievance but as provenance. Sometimes, a life needs a small artifact to mark where the angle changed. I turned off the light and let the room belong to the quiet. Wealth. I still believe is not a number. It is a capacity. The capacity to hold your ground without spectacle, to lift without announcing, to leave a door open for someone willing to do the walking. Celeste had walked. The rest would be practice. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.